All right, everyone, so we're going to find the amplitude given the graph. So how are we going to do this? Well, first off, what is amplitude? Amplitude, if you remember back here, is the distance from the peak or the valley to the midline. So we're trying to find that. Now realize something really important here. Here's the total distance from the top to the bottom. The amplitude is half the distance from the top to the bottom. Remember that. That's important. So from the top to the bottom, the amplitude is going to be half the distance the top to the bottom. So let me just write that. So amplitude half the distance between the max and min. That's just going to help us with the first problem. The second problem is going to be pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and go with this one. So what we have here is we want that vertical distance. So our vertical distance is going to be the difference in those y values there. And let me just draw it with a straight line. That would be much better, wouldn't it? I wonder if they have one with that. Nah, they don't. That'd have been great. So we want, this is 2.5, this is negative 4.5. So let's find that distance, the vertical distance. So that's going to be 2.5 minus negative 4.5. That's how I find distance. We want to find that length there. So 2.5 plus 4.5 is 7. So 7 is the total distance here. So we want to figure out, okay, if our midline is right here, so we want half of that distance. Our amplitude is just half of 7. So amplitude is going to equal half of 7, or 7 over 2. Or 3.5. So I'll put that there. It's half of 7, right? 7 is the whole distance. So half of it will be the amplitude. Same thing here. If they give you the top and the bottom, find that vertical distance and cut it in half. That's going to give you the amplitude. Well, you don't get that mixed up with what we did in the past. When do we average the two numbers? When do we do that? Think about what we're trying to find here. Are you trying to find the midline, in which case you need the middle of those two numbers? That's the midline. Or are you trying to find the amplitude, which is going to be the distance from the midline to the top, or distance from the midline down to the bottom? In which case you want to find what's the total distance between the two and cut that in half. So really the question, when you ask me that question, I'm just going to really want to reflect it back to you and ask you the same thing. Like, oh, I don't know. How do you know? Because this is the kind of stuff you guys stop and think about. You know, how come math isn't applicable in real life? Probably because we're not thinking about it in the right way. These are the kind of problem-solving skills you need to develop. I'm not going to write a big chart for you and say, if you're given this and given that, then do this and do that. That's not going to help anybody. You need to think about the situation you're in right here. We know amplitude is right here, this distance from the midline to the top, which is half the total distance. So find the total distance, cut it in half. This one's even easier. We just need the vertical distance. We need this distance right here. This is the amplitude. So let's go ahead and just subtract the y values. That's finding that distance between negative 2.7. Remember, it's a positive number, so we're just going to subtract these two. If you end up with a negative number, you just do the absolute value. So that's negative 2.7 plus 10.1. So yeah, technically I should put absolute value just in case. Should have done that in the last one as well. Just because we're finding distance, and I get 7.8. So that's the distance here. We don't need to cut that in half. That's already our amplitude. We already have the midline y value, the maximum y value, So if we just find the distance between those two, that's giving us this vertical distance here, 7.8, and boom, we're done. That's it. That's the amplitude. Same thing with this one. You can see, find the distance between those two. If you do the top minus the bottom, you will get a positive number, so it might be better to make that a habit.